Is lecturer Mantoa Motinyane from the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, and her title is Exploring Teaching Linguistic Research During COVID-19, Lessons Learned.
Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mantoa Motinyane, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Linguistics. I'm also the director of a newly established Center for Advanced Studies of African Society, which is in the Arts and Humanities faculty. So today I would like to thank the organizers of this series of webinars for giving us an opportunity to share some of the challenges and triumphs with teaching, specifically research during the time of the pandemic. So I'm going to be switching my camera off from now going forward. So the module that I'm going to share my experiences about with you today is called Research Methods in Language and Communication. And it is a third year first semester module. And the primary aim of the module is to work with students, mostly senior students, to create research proposals which they can use for their honors or even masters at UWC or elsewhere. Although this module is part of the requirements for linguistics, I've learned through course evaluations that some of them take it just as an elective. So for the past 2 years, we've had just over 320 students, and the module has a long history. So I'm not the first one to teach it. So for that matter, I would like to thank Professor Quentin Williams, who shared notes from previous years and some of the experiences. And what I can remember from one of the first staff meetings was that when we were planning, was that tutors complain a lot about marking. So I was warned before I even started. So going into the next slide, I would like to talk a little bit about the background of the module. As I've indicated, or maybe I haven't, my first year at UWC was in 2021. And at least I've had 9 months of lockdown while I was at UCT before coming to UWC. So at least I was somewhat clued in with some aspects of online space. However, being new came with a lot of challenges. So the first thing I remember was that there's a wave of talks about UWC being a research-led institution. The other buzzwords that I had on was about social responsiveness, giving back to the community. So rather than panicking, although I did panic a bit, I tried as much as I can to teach myself about the institution because there was no one there. Everyone was working from home. So I needed to make sure that whatever I did, I tried to keep the students as engaged as possible, because the first encounter with them as a new person in the department, a new person in the institution, was through the online platform. So I really needed to make sure that I stay in touch with them. I had to make sure that students have ways to access textbooks. So I used online textbooks. I also needed to make sure that articles are easily available. So I did use a lot of the articles from my colleagues. Part of this was to familiarize myself with the work that other colleagues in the department are doing, but also to make sure that if an article is not available online, I can just email them and ask them to send me a copy. And thirdly, I also wanted to emphasize the fact that a researcher is not someone who comes from overseas, but it's someone who walks the corridors with all of us, well, the online space in this instance. So I tried to use as much open access documents as I could. In terms of the platform, I use the iKamva for posting slides and podcasts, posting assignments, quizzes, tutorials, and setting up online consultations. For the live sessions, we used Google Meet and a little bit of Zoom when we had guest lecturers. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is the context of the module in spaces of curriculum reform. As a new person, one of the things that I was asked when I was interviewed is what I hope to bring to the university in terms of curriculum reform. And one of my strongholds is that I speak most of the South African languages. So I really wanted to capitalize on that to make sure that I make sure that everybody has access to the information. So I read a little bit about language and teaching planning at the university. So I wanted to make sure that the way that the curriculum is pitched is slightly different, but it also challenges the discourses around the curriculum reform in as far as it goes about, for example, the attitudes towards using other languages other than English. I also made sure, given that linguistics being a scientific study of language, and not just a particular language, but languages in general, we make sure that the theories that we use really challenge the discourses that dominate knowledge production in human sciences. The next thing is that I wanted to make sure that there's a serious shift in terms of constructing alternative thoughts, what we call voices from the South. So part of using our colleagues is that they had already laid a foundation by sharing intellectual project. There's a project that Professor Bock and the other team members worked on, which continues to be one of the groundbreaking curriculum reform and knowledge generation from the South. So the course content, obviously the course is about creating a research proposal at the end. So the course content was a reflection of the stages or the steps that one would take in creating the research proposal. However, I've placed it in a circle because it's very difficult to decide where to start. So in this manner, students could ask anything about their research proposal at any point. So those are the stages and they are equal to the number of different topics. Some were over 2 weeks, some just 1 week. Okay, so one of the other things that I felt were important to share with the audience here is that one of the challenges that we face is the terminology that has to do with defining what research is. And most of the scientific definitions of research makes it very difficult for one being a student to see themselves as a future researcher. So what I did was to use the UWC research policy in the definition alongside the other definitions that are out there. So the concern was that I want students to know that it's not always the case that research is good when it comes from elsewhere. We are also researchers, and therefore we need to refer to ourselves. But more importantly is the fact that the research policy encourages students working with their communities. So I didn't want this to look like making students go and do research in their communities, which is out of line with what the university encourages. So it was a good way to show that we do actually respond to the call from the university in terms of being a research-led institution. So one of the things that I did, this is in the next slide, was to make sure that I engage as much as possible with the other communities within the institution. The students that I had as part of the final year, well, the third year, they have had maybe a semester or two on campus, and then the following year, they had no lectures at all. They were on the virtual space. So some of them had really not had an opportunity to learn how to use a computer or how to search for documents and all that. So the library team, the Faculty of Humanities, Arts and Humanities team, I approached them, although they don't usually provide workshops for undergraduate students. When I motivated for this, they were quite willing to come. And it was really helpful and very useful in terms of teaching students how to access library services virtually. Also the privileges that comes with being a student in terms of ordering things from the library, how they get copied and sent to you, and for those who needed books where they can pick them up and all that. And because this is a research methods course, it's actually very important to learn how to search for information, how to package it, and how to eliminate all the things that you don't need. The graph there is showing that about 80% of the students use their laptops to access the information. But obviously, this is a very, very small sample. But when I read some of the comments from the students, was that although they had their laptops and all that, they didn't always have access in terms of getting a good signal. So it was really good that we were able to save some of the information and upload it on them on iKamva for later access. In terms of the formulation of their research questions, I only represent a little portion of the disciplines in linguistics. I come from the tradition of formal linguistics, and my other primary area is psycholinguistics. And there are lots of other ones. So instead of forcing...
2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay, thank you. Instead of forcing students to do research in the area that I do, I use the guest lecturers to provide some guidelines in terms of the research that they do, how they formulate the questions, how they go about using literature, for example, to support the kind of questions. But more importantly, the emphasis was on the fact that we don't need to go to other communities to do research. We can actually do research in our own backyards. And it's not necessarily the case that English is the only language that's useful when it comes to producing new knowledge. And I'll skip to the conclusion because I've run out of time. So I don't want to conclude with challenges, but we did have issues with providing quick feedback to students with marking over 300 proposals, obviously. This year it was better because we moved some of the quizzes to auto marking on iKamva, and I'm sure next year is going to be great. So in closing, I just wanted to emphasize that we want students to see that conducting research in our communities, it's not something that requires people to come from elsewhere. The fact that we've used the guest lecturers to show us that they're conducting research in a socially responsive manner. We hope in that way, students will give back to the communities in line with the university's mission. Thank you very much.